All right, so we're continuing here with rhetorical analysis. Here we're going to look at modern rhetoric and modern speech. Essentially, this is still part of arrangement and organization. And here we're looking at how modern speakers choose to organize their work, especially in the form of a speech. There are three basic, like, sorry, there are three people who are extremely influential as far as this goes right now. We have Carl Rogers, the psychologist, Stephen Tolman, the mathematician and rhetorician, and Alan Monroe, also a psychologist. So Carl Rogers was a family therapist, and he wrote a number of books. From his books, there was derived a organizational strategy known as the Rogerian argument, which is probably the most influential one right now. You can sum it up by this idea in this article by Lincoln Mullen. She wrote, "Even if you win, you may lose. No one likes to be wrong." So this is the basic outline for the Rogerian argument. I would note that there's some nice stuff in the notes below there. So first, you want to objectively state the issue or problem. Summarize the opposition's case. So the very first thing you do is you look at the alternative perspective. Then you state your own position. Then you suggest some type of compromise, right? However, if that is not possible, you want to show how your position is benefit to your opponent as well. And then outline a proposed solution that would work for both parties if no compromise is possible. That's essentially the Rogerian argument. All right. Stephen Tolman is most famous for this book here, The Uses of Argument. And he was born in England, educated at Oxford, came here to California to USC, where he finished his PhD and in mathematics. In his seminal work, this piece here, The Uses of Argument, he states this, which is kind of like, I think, a mantra for all writing. Data of some kind must be produced if there is to be an argument there at all. Right? Just think of any essay that you write for any class. You got to have evidence, you got to have analysis. Part and parcel of any essay, right? You got to have evidence, you got to have analysis. If there's no data, how are we furthering an argument, right? How are we convincing anyone of anything if there's no data? That would be a problem. Now, I've read this book. I think probably the best way to understand it, I've read most of these books that I'm talking about, of course, but this one's particularly confusing. It's not clear. He suggests many different strategies. Essentially, the best way to look at Tolman's 5 parts are in two ways. But let's start first of all with the fact that it's non-linear, right? If you look at, say, something like this, right, the Rogerian argument, it's linear in presentation. There's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you are literally supposed to write a Rogerian argument in that order, the correct order, if you will. Tolman's, okay, so there are 2 parts to this. So A, it's non-linear. So the 2 things that you might be able to do with this is you might be able to, well, let's just say one thing. The way that this makes the most sense is if you just think of a single argument, like maybe a point that you're trying to make in a body paragraph. And you want to make sure that that point hits on all 5 of these. There's a claim, which would be the point. That's an argument. Data, right? Got to have data to support anything. The warrant is essentially analysis. We'll talk about that in a moment. And we'll break down qualifiers, and the rebuttal would be like a counter argument. So Tolman says that you need to have these 5 things in order to have any kind of logical argument. So like when I said earlier, like you can look at it 2 ways. I mean, I think the best way to look at it is, like I said a moment ago, to just look at it as a strategy for logical argument. If you want to look at it as an essay as a whole, that's probably more challenging. I would just say to like make sure that each paragraph and each point that you make has these in it. So anyway, it's a non-linear approach. We're not saying that this is how an essay or speech should look, but Tolman is suggesting that you should have these parts. Claim is the argument itself. Data comes from the Latin datum, or something given. But what I love about what Tolman writes about data is that what he says here, we want support, we want factual information, but most importantly, information organized for analysis or used to reason or make decisions. That is really important. Like when you think about any essay that you ever write, any type of evidence that you want to provide should do exactly that. Like, what is the point of having evidence if the purpose of that evidence is not to help the audience figure something out or make a decision or draw a conclusion about something, right? If that's not the purpose, then I don't know what is, right? That's the purpose. So when you choose what kind of evidence and what kind of quotes you want to put in your paper, or in your thesis or your bachelor's project, think very carefully, right? What is going to be not only the best piece of evidence, but a piece of evidence that will help the audience follow your reasoning and hopefully draw a similar conclusion. All right. Warrant, like we said, is like analysis. Let me see if I have... I wonder if I can do like a whiteboard. Do they have a whiteboard? I guess, I don't know if they have a whiteboard on this one. As that would be on the Zoom calls. Now we don't have a whiteboard here. The warrant is like analysis. If you, let's see, if you took Philosophy 101, Logic 101, the first thing, or one of the first things that they will teach you is the three parts of any argument are claim, data, warrant. 1, 2, 3. So there's a claim or an argument, right? There's data or support. And then there is the warrant. The warrant is a lot like what we do in English class when we do analysis. Warrant is basically, if we go back and we look at the data and we look at the claim, what the purpose of the warrant is it is basically saying or kind of explaining how the data supports the claim. How does this data or this information defend or support the claim or argument that you initially made? That's a warrant. But it is very similar to analysis. Modal qualifiers, essentially the point here is just don't make all or nothing arguments. Those are very easy to defeat. You know, saying all so-and-so people are like this, or no so-and-so people are like that. You know, those are not only stereotypical arguments that are very, very awful and oftentimes hurtful, but those arguments are very easy to disprove, right? All or nothing arguments should be avoided at all cost. What they suggest is to use qualifiers. Sometimes, most, many, some. And you want to finish your, your logical argument with a rebuttal. Now, again, this is not saying like organize your speech this way. That wouldn't make any sense. But to have all these elements, right, either in the paragraph or in the speech or in the paper itself, it needs to have all of these things. So, let's see, are we at, the last one there, rebuttal, which we kind of covered already. Rebuttal is a counter argument. We do cover it in that section, but okay, so we'll just summarize to say that when you're analyzing the counter argument, you're trying to analyze the best or strongest argument against what you're saying. And you want to give it a real thorough look. And you're trying to ask yourself, how you could convince someone who feels this way of your belief or your opinion. Okay. So that brings us up to the last one, which is Monroe. Monroe's motivated sequence is, it's a linear argument strategy for how you might present an argument. This is extremely popular in political science. Starts off with attention, like a hook. That's something that's probably familiar at this point. Start with something shocking, something dramatic, a quote, a statistic. establish need or psychological need. Why you would want something. Satisfaction would be to provide solutions, like why you would want to do a certain thing. And then visualization, you want to present a visual metaphor. If you look back to essay 2, Garrett Hardin, Dr. Hardin's lifeboat ethics, he does a very good job of this. And likewise, or I said, in contrast, you could say Singer does not, right? Singer doesn't have a visual metaphor that wraps his whole argument up into one sentence. Lifeboat ethics does kind of do that, right? The lifeboat, there are people in the water who are without the resources. There are people in the lifeboat who have the resources. So it's a pretty vivid visual metaphor. And then the last part of the Monroe's motivated sequence is to take action, what they call a hortative sentence, put forth solutions. What can the audience do to solve the problem? What can be done? So that is Monroe's motivated sequence. And now why we cover these things is bring it to a point here. Isius, one of the great speakers of all time, when his work is studied or analyzed, it shows that he follows no distinct pattern. Instead, he would vary the structure according to the needs of each particular speech. So it's very useful to have all these different tools, and then you can pick and choose when is the right opportunity to use them. So if we pick up here on 71, we start to get into style. And there are various types of appeals, or what we might call the use of style. I'll go back a page, I'm sorry. We have persuasive appeals, rhetorical devices, and logical fallacies. So it does cover all of those in the next however many pages it is. It is the behemoth of all these lectures. It is the longer of them. So these are. Perhaps I should briefly apologize for some background noise. I don't have a door, and we're still in quarantine, so my entire family is on the other side of this non-door here. Okay, so my apologies for the background noise. So the three basic types of appeals that Aristotle talks about, and he calls his three argumentative appeals, these are the basic appeals that anyone could use in basically any situation. They're very easy to use. So ethos is Greek for character, meaning a moral or ethical position. Ethos, of course, can be misused. If you think of people who commit identity theft or some type of identity fraud, these are people who are misrepresenting themselves. Pathos is Greek for suffering or experience. Basically, this is the use of any type of emotion. We have listed here some of the more common ones that might be used to forward a message or an idea. Anger, hate, love, patriotism, hope, revenge. And logos, or Greek for embodied thought. Logos is the use of facts, reason, statistics, logic, and organization. It does fall under logos, actually. So ethos is an appeal to character, usually the character of the speaker. Pathos is like if I were to use the use of emotion to try to make you think or believe a certain thing. And logos would be the use of reason, facts, or statistics, or logical, or other logical strategies. All right. So ethos can be broken down into a couple different parts. I can see I'm not even going to get to the end of this part. So it can be broken down to these three parts: appeal to the credibility of the speaker, appeal to a moral or ethical belief, or an appeal to the morality or credibility of the audience. We'll pick up there with one more on rhetorical analysis to complete the series.